Hello and welcome. This is Tristan McGough, and today we're going to be talking about another topic in intermediate selfology. And this one is the Individualizing Virtue Set. We're going to take, I think, 4 or 5 virtues here. We'll look at them a little more in depth than what we had in terms of the overall Virtueverse the last time. These are personal empowerments of the will in the Virtueverse. And they are the building of your conscience set, which has to do with not just your moral development, but the character strengths that you, as a trifold human being of spirit, soul, and soma, of consciousness, self-consciousness, and other consciousness, of apperception, where you always know what it is that awareness is thinking or feeling, regardless of whatever it is, and attention, which is the psychical component of the soul, where it is self-conscious and it is conscious of being conscious. And what is it conscious of? Well, that's what it apprehends here in the somatic realm, in the realm of the empirical finite. So when we're talking about virtues in these 14 domains, which, just to refresh your memory, we're dealing with these as part of the psychonaut. That is, where he's building, or she, moral fiber, as it were, character strength, in order to progress along the path all the way to the apex of the mountain, and all that transformation that takes place there as we as individual beings develop and unfold, because we don't just develop our personalities, we also unfold our souls and the potentials that are there. And just to recall, last time we were speaking of the Virtueverse in terms of the 14 different domains. And these are areas, if you will, of the competencies of consciousness as you, as a flowering human being. That is a human being that at every single instant is constantly being reborn and are alive with fresh impulses and with the structure you've already set in place called character. This character structure, of course, is, if you will, the backbone or the skeleton to your entire system of you as a self-intuiting consciousness, as well as your will and your feelings and your actions and your thoughts. Speaking of thoughts, let's take a look at the first of these realms that we'll cover today, which is the intellectual virtues. And these intellectual virtues can be seen and arrayed in this perspective, where you begin, first of all, with curiosity. But that may be founded, of course, on the love of truth. And the love of truth itself is an intellectual virtue. There are some people who have no regard for the truth whatsoever. But a love of truth itself is considered an intellectual virtue, as is curiosity, as Aristotle said. All men, humankind, all men by nature desire to know. And here, this desire to know is to explore for the purpose of understanding. But there's also, as I've mentioned earlier in previous episodes, a very great virtue called clarity. And clarity is the distinct apprehension of an inner object called an idea. Critical thinking is the use of various ideas in order to analyze any phenomena or any proposition or any program or any project, and to set the thinking against various standards that you may have either been taught or that you have acquired in other ways or self-developed. Another great virtue, of course, of the intellect is being open-minded. Intellectual humility is the willingness to understand that your own knowledge is limited. I think it was Sophocles that said, no man can know everything. No human can know everything. And so therefore there needs to be intellectual humility and understanding that whatever apparent certitude or at least surety that you've been able to probabilize or been able to verify, corroborate, and crystallize as a truthful proposition, no matter how certain you may be, remember that that is only one part of a building block into a greater puzzle to solve in the perspective of the cosmos. Which leads us to perspicacity, which is the ability to acutely key into something. It's the discerning intellect that knows exactly how to penetrate and to infallibly know something about someone or something. And there's, of course, problem solving, which is the innovative approach and resilient thinking. It's the heuristic methodology where you're discovering how it is that you are going to meet an existential dilemma. Or it may be the application of an algorithm, that is, of a set-wise production of rules that are going to allow you to solve with a formula something like a mathematical formula, a numerical problem. But then there's, of course, also pliancy, and that is the ability of the intellect not to remain fixed on one particular point of view, one particular dogma, one particular methodology or way of experimentation, but to be open, through open-mindedness, to a more pliable approach that may integrate other factors. And then, of course, there's creative thinking. And creative thinking is the capacity for not just comparing things, but for synthesizing them into a higher order dialectic functionability. There's prudence as an intellectual virtue, that is being able to weigh options and to decide what is the most efficient and effective way to progress. And that differs from sagacity. Sagacity is sagely wisdom. It's where an individual, perhaps after decades, sometimes through insight when they're young, understand the human condition and the way to go about and resolve various aspects that permeate all of our lives. Sagacity, sageliness, this kind of maturation of intellectual virtues into wisdom is something which is a treasure, not just to oneself, but to everyone else who can participate in seeing that there are certain universal resolutions for existential dilemmas. Well, besides intellectual virtues, there are, of course, the virtues we're all familiar with, the moral virtues. And here I'm not going to preach that there are simply 7 cardinal virtues, or there are 3 that are the classical virtues and there are 4 theological. We don't need to look at that. What we need to look at is the entire gamut of moral virtues. And if you look at moral virtues and you begin with just simply non-injury at the very top, that's harmlessness towards all sentient beings, not just human beings, all sentient beings. Another moral virtue is inner peace. How can one possibly bring about outer peace unless one has inner peace? And there's honesty. It's not just sincerity, but honesty. Honesty is where you're willing to look at what you sincerely believe, what you sincerely feel. That is, you take a bold, naked, bare approach to your own opinions, your own feelings, your own perspectives, and you say, all right, that's the way I've sincerely felt all along, but honestly, what is that feeling? Vigilance is introspective, sensory attention. It's where you understand that there are certain things you want to pay attention to. If you've set the parameters of your attention, such as reading the book, then you want to be vigilant to any kind of distraction that may take you away, such as even your internal thoughts that may excite you and that take you away from the page that you're reading, which is what you set your mind to do. Shame is a good, moral, positive, impelling feature that we all have naturally, as we have all these other capabilities for inner peace and non-injury and honesty, etc. But here, when we're talking about shame, it motivates you to correct conduct, and that is a good thing. If you turn shame into guilt, where it becomes a nagging, festering, putrid cyst formation that inhibits you from growing and flowering as a human being, that is something entirely different. And that is something that must be dismantled. But the healthy sense of shame that you've done something wrong or that you need to be contrite and correct your behavior is a good and moral thing. Embarrassment is another, where shame is internal, embarrassment is external. You would be embarrassed to do this, you say, in front of so-and-so. Well, that is a cue to the moral conscience. Remember, conscience includes all these virtues, but amongst them, particularly strong, is this set of moral virtues by which we underpin our will and therefore provide the platform of proclivities which propel us into the future as motivation. So we want to be very careful what it is. That's why we're being vigilant morally to see what it is that we're doing at any given time, so we don't have to be either internally ashamed or externally embarrassed. Temperance is another moral virtue. There's a beautiful quote from The Lost Horizon of Shangri-La by James Hilton, and I believe it is the elder monk is explaining to the interlopers about their moral universe. And when it came to moderation, he advised all things in moderation, including moderation. So here's what temperance is. Temperance is you keeping your moral balance by moderating your internal thoughts and your external conduct. Courage is the audacity to proceed even in the face of fear. Justice is balancing fairly what is good with what is bad. Those two terms themselves should best be looked upon as something altogether different, because each of us tends to define the good and the bad ideologically instead of morally. Morally, you're looking at good and bad and how it functions in the universal whole to create harmony and order and balance. And if you're looking at that kind of functionability, justice is what brings that harmony into a living experience. It's balancing what is suitable rather than what is good with what is unsuitable, rather than labeling it as bad. So suitability and functionability, and if you will, where a thing functions within the larger cosmic scheme, where it fits in terms of fulfilling purpose as a function that performs an effective result. That is all part of what each of us has constituted as a sense of justice. Zeal is a unique, joyous perseverance. Despite any obstacle, there is always a joyous perseverance, whether it is in meditation, whether it is in bathing, whether it is in sports, whether it is in playtime, whether it is in work time. There is always an inner joyous perseverance. Just to have the vigor to go on is a marvelous thing. And so one joyously perseveres, and this is a function of will. Conscientiousness, that's due diligence. That's paying attention to what you're doing meticulously and how it fits in, at least to the proximate environment and then to the greater whole. Integrity is how all these parts fit together. If you will, their strength, their internal tensile strength is integrity. Integrity is that applied to the moral fiber of a human being. Mercy is a moral virtue because rather than applying a cold, hard, calculating rule, allegedly of justice, which is just a standard here, don't confuse a measurement or a standard with actual justice, which is multidimensional, and you have to take into account not just the act that was done and the ripple effects and the collective karma and how it impacts and where its places in history. All of that is keenly felt within the moral virtue of justice. Here we're talking about how things hang together internally. This is integrity. Mercy is where you allow, instead of that standard, you don't slap somebody with a ruler on the back of the hand because they're reaching for the piece of chocolate. You kindly take their hand and show them where you would like to put it, and you can offer the child the chocolate on your own at the proper due time. But mercy is realizing that in any circumstance, something that is bad and unsuitable can be made better. And it can be made better, first of all, by a merciful attitude. Patience, forbearance, that is where you are able to endure all things, understanding through joyous perseverance that you have that internal power to overcome any particular obstacle. So as difficult as circumstances may be, you have no choice but to be patient, because patient, of course, means passive, right? There's an agent and there's a patient. There's the passive part of you, and you have no choice but to receive what the universe has given you. You can put up blocks, you can try to deflect, but ultimately you must receive what the universe is directing your way. And with that patience, you attain your equilibrium, because, of course, the universe is not something that you are just receiving. It's something that you embody. And so you are broadcasting at the same time, and therefore it's important to be responsible. The moral virtue of responsibility is where you understand you have the ability to respond to other sentient beings' needs, and you take that ability to respond seriously, and you fulfill it as responsibility. Forgiveness, of course, is letting go within yourself of any adverse, negative, clinging, or attachment. You have to sometimes forgive yourself for being too attached to the things that you desire. And then there's gratitude. From your single breath that you inhale, you can be grateful for, to all the wonderful blessings that you've been given in your life by other sentient, caring beings. You have every reason to be grateful to the universe as a whole, to the individuals that have supplied you with life and meaning and tenderness and compassion and mercy and all the other moral virtues here that we've spoken of. And then there, of course, is goodness. Goodness is where everything functions as a unity. Finding that part that you are participating in as an event, or which you find yourself installed in as an element, whether at work or at home, is finding where you fit within that harmonic, that cosmic whole. That is goodness. And that leads back to non-injury, because if everything is perfect as it is, and you are able to promote its harmony, then there's no reason whatsoever to injure anyone for any reason. The next set that we are going to cover are artistic and creative virtues. And these are all things that help to strengthen, as we said, the virtue set of the individual. And we all have this. We all have imagination, aesthetic sensibility, where we're able to appreciate the beauty, whether it's of a sunset or a painting or sometimes a piece of poetry, whatever it is. We have a natural receptivity to it that then we can cultivate as appreciation. We have our own expressiveness. Things that we enjoy doing, we can express, whether it's through music or painting, calligraphy, dance, installation art, lighting, architecture, whatever one's creative outlet is. They want to be expressive, and more than that, they want to bring some novelty into the world with originality. And this, of course, takes, in terms of artistic virtues, vision. That is the ability from an ideating level to bring it down through the various imaginative and design levels, to engineer it, and finally to construct it and utilize it in this world. And as you do that, it shouldn't be a matter of work. One of the things that any artist will tell you, that any creative will express to you, is that they are lost in play. Play is, of course, unorganized activity, where work is organized activity. You're doing it for some express goal, where when play, you are simply spontaneously, remember your youth, remember your childhood, spontaneous play. You did not have to plan anything. It was all a great joy. You were involved in play. You should be involved in play from moment to moment to moment to moment. And particularly during your artistic moments where you're being expressive and you're taking some facet of your potential, whether it's musical or whether it's other, doesn't matter, and you are expressing it in artistry. That is in your own set of applied rules and skills and methodology, some which you may have learned and acquired through being tutored by others, some which you may have self-instructed as an autodidact, and some which you may find just originally are developing as you develop your own artistic style. And of course, that all began in imagination, that will all end in imagination for every created object, whether it's a piece of sculpture, whether it's a piece of architecture such as the Parthenon, leaves to each of us as we behold it ourselves in our imagination. Let's consider the next group of virtues that are very akin to the artistic and creative virtues that we mentioned, in that they are applying the transfinity of your own experience as a psychical entity into the outer objective finite world and leaving something behind. The technical and practical virtues do that in an extraordinarily concrete and effective manner. And so they demand precision. So any kind of technical or practical virtue that you're going to do, take holding the fork for instance, it has to be precisely held, or it has to be held in some way precisely in order for it to work. Ingenuity is another facet of the technical world in which you are creating something new, or you're solving a problem with some ingenious workaround, jury-rigged solution, or a completely new design. All of that is going to take, of course, discipline. Every trade, every technical vocation has a discipline, as well as its methodologies that are used. In any kind of technical and practical virtue matter, you have to have adaptability. You have to be able to use that hammer in an adaptable way for its correct function on the different heads of nails, for instance. Competence. You must have a set of capacities that are skilled, that are formulated and organized in such a fashion that they are ready to hand because they are first in mind. Persistence. This goes along with discipline. You have to be persistent. And this reminds, of course, of the virtue of zeal. Zeal as a moral virtue is that joyous perseverance. And here you must be on the practical, finite level persistent in your practice and the application of your trade. Efficiency is the skillful way of streamlining the process so that you not only can save time and cost and energy and headache, but you can do it in the most practically effective manner possible. Craftsmanship is, of course, that fine element where every single person who's a creative has a panache. They have their own unique way of applying the methods that they've learned and that they've established as part of the discipline of their trade. They have their own unique resultant style that leads to craftsmanship. It's the mastery of their craft or of their particular trade. Impeccability is another word for what we were just talking about, of this excellence as the result of craftsmanship. And all of this is due to diligence. That is, to paying precise attention to everything that is being done on the finite level, which is just why these are practical virtues. They are virtues that in the empirical realm are absolutely crucial to our survival and to our being able to thrive. And part of that, being able to thrive within the cosmos, is having a big picture view, which is what religious virtues are. They bring a sense of purpose and of community and of belonging to something that's larger than oneself. This is absolutely essential because we all do belong to something that's larger than ourselves. We belong to many things that are larger than ourselves. In fact, our minds are constructed out of mental substance larger than ourselves. Our emotions out of emotional substance larger than ourselves. Our vitality out of the vitality of the universe at a subatomic level that is larger than our bodies and ourselves. Out of the very organic materials that I take in and ingest from outside and rebuild my very body. All of this is dependent upon something which is larger than myself. So, religious virtues are not something which are optional to anyone. They are something which are absolutely necessary and crucial to one as you attempt to fit into the larger whole. Do not necessarily confuse religious virtues with dogmatic adherence. They are not necessarily one and the same. And in fact, as we already alluded to, spiritual virtues, such as love as a whole, these are some things that transcend, and they must transcend any dogma. You do not just give love to those whom are your neighbors. You do not just give love to people who you know or who have loved you or who have given you something that you feel happy to have received. That's not the kind of love that's a spiritual value. That is something that's beyond dogma. When you love something for it and nothing for yourself. In terms of religious virtues, you are seeing yourself connected to individuals, your family, friends, community at large and acquaintances, your associates, expanding into the wider society, nation, the nation upon nation and continent, the entire globe. And upon this globe, not only do we have a humanity layer, there is also an animal layer, and a plant layer, and a mineral layer. And all of these layers create this biosphere in which all of us live and move. And we have our being. And so faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. The substance of things hoped for are your potentialities. Those are the very things that you will activate in order to bring about what was envisioned into reality. Therefore, hope is well founded in terms of religious virtue, because as this moment has unfolded from the past moment, this moment leads to the unfolding of the next moment, which itself in turn will be an unfoldment from this moment. That is the nature of hope. Reverence is where you see that the reason for hope is that it's interconnected with the entire universe. Reverence is reverence of what is divine. And what is divine is what permeates the entire cosmos. There's a wonderful Nordic saying that says the divine sleeps in rocks, breathes in plants, dreams in animals, and wakes in human beings. So when we awaken as human beings to the interdependency of all the entities that are interconnected, this gives us a sense of the divine that permeates us all. That's what we have reverence for. Devotion is where you take the best of your aspirations and direct them to the highest goals that allow you to feel inspired in your participation with the whole. Obedience is where you listen to the small, still voice that arises in your conscience. That is what you must be obedient to. You can be obedient to no woman, to no man, to no creature, to no dogma, to no idea, to no platform, to no ideology, to nothing that is put up in here by something that comes from out to in. The obedience we are talking about is obedience to the God within, that very divinity that is sleeping in rocks, that's breathing in plants, that's dreaming in animals, and that awakens in you, is that which is to you are to be obedient and nothing else. Piety is that deep sense of adoration, and particularly an adoration that endures. So that piety is not a fleeting feeling. Piety is a state of faith in which one's heart is forever projected into the future in terms of a devotedness to unfolding the divine in that rock, the divine in that plant, in that animal, in that human, in all of it together in which you pay reverence. Piety is paying attention to the divinity in each part of the whole. Generosity is, of course, giving what you have to others that are in need. You have a well which is a plethora from which you can constantly give. The well springs the joys of happiness and smiles and well wishes and blessings and material things as well. 3 things that you can be generous with. You can be generous with your material goods. You can be generous with your intellectual goods by sharing with others what you know. And you can be generous by sharing with them your morality, which first of all is not injury. So if you're not injuring someone, you are automatically being supremely generous. If they are not injuring you, they are being supremely generous. And it's good to have that kind of understanding, that there's the sacrifice that takes place, where generosity, you're giving from your wellspring of potential into actual. And sacrifice, what you were actually doing to sacrifice something, you're making it sacred. That's what the means sacred is, or to make holy. It's to inscribe and to set apart from. So when you are making a sacrifice, you are setting it apart from everything else. If you sacrifice, for instance, your harsh words and you put them on the altar of your psychic death so that you will never utter another harsh word, or when you do, you will immediately be contrite and show that shame or embarrassment and then reverse course. But if you can sacrifice various elements, particularly that are unsuitable, by setting them apart in your attention so that you can pay particular attention to them and you can consciously transform them for the sake of the harmony of the whole, that is what true sacrifice is. It's not forcing some vicarious sacrifice, or where you're having some animal or some other human sacrifice themselves for you. You are making the sacrificial gesture by choosing what to pay attention to and what to put on the altar of that attention in order to transform. And we end up, of course, with faith, which once again, in that process of transformation, it proves. It's the evidence of things not seen. It now has become evident. So until the next set of virtues that we're going to consider, which these were personal endowments in the Virtueverse, we're going to consider collective empowerments in the Virtueverse. So until then, behave when you must, be good whenever you can, but above all else, be yourself.